Welcome, dear listener. Tonight we will travel to Asian steppes, horses breathing politely in the dark, a bowstring answering the cold with a low thrum, a kettle doing its steady whispering work. The tent is felt, the night is enormous, and the stars are not decoration, they're lanes. If cozy history helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. Tonight, we step out onto the Asian steppe to meet the riders many later chronicles call the Asian Huns, the Xiongnu, people who could fold their homes at dawn and still carry an empire by noon. We begin when night begins. You hear it before you see it. The breathing of horses, the soft clink of harness rings, the brief whicker that sounds like someone clearing their throat politely outside your door. The door is a felt flap. The walls are felt too. Wool pressed and stitched and sweet with the faint scent of smoke. A kettle hums somewhere near your ankle. The night is large, but the tent is warm, and the stars beyond the flap are not decoration. They are lanes. They are honest little guides you can trust at 3 a.m. when the wind has opinions. You draw the flap aside and the grassland is a dark sea. And out there, riding the lines between stars and grass, are the people you have come to meet. The Asian Huns, what many chronicles call the Xiongnu. They travel light, they travel far, and tonight they let you walk with them by the sound of hoofbeats. The steppe is not empty. From a distance it can seem like a large shrug of earth, uninterested in your plans. But come closer and it offers a rhythm. Frost-silvered grass in one season, lush grazing in another, shallow streams in braid-like loops, sky so wide it teaches you to breathe bigger. Here, empire is not made of marble, it's braided from horsehair and habit. The homes arrive and depart with the weather. A village can be here today, and over that ridge tomorrow, and it still counts as the same village. Everything important fits on a cart and everything essential knows how to move. If you've ever packed a suitcase and told yourself you'd live simply, the steppe smiles. Yes, it says. That's the idea. Within the felt circles of camp there are small ordinary things you will notice first. A saddle resting upside down on a wooden stand, so the quilted pads can keep their shape. A bow bent into a quiet parenthesis, wrapped in leather, sinew-backed to remember its strength even when the weather forgets. Bone toggles fastening a cloak. Copper pots catching a low fire's red light. The word for ruler here is chanyu, a word you feel rather than pronounce, like the warmth you sense from a brazier even before the first spark. The word for agreement isn't always spoken. It rides in with gifts and rides out with promises. Leaders are carried not just by horses, but by the belief that those horses will arrive where they say they will, with the people who said they would come. You walk to the edge of the camp and the wind uses your cloak like a bellows, filling it with cold. Out on the dark you can hear a voice singing. The tone moves high and low, long and near. People say the old songs carry maps inside them. They name springs and ridges. They note the good windbreak behind that little crescent of hills. If you listen long enough, you start to taste salt from old travel, to feel the rattle of flint in a pocket. You start to understand that rumour on the steppe is a kind of weather. Not always precise, but frequently telling you what you need to bring for the day. The name you hear in many of those songs is Modu, sometimes written Mautun, who brings scattered camps into a pattern and turns a loose chorus into a choir. The stories of his rise are told with the oblique politeness of winter. They whisper tests of loyalty and decisions as cold as iron. The point is not the sharpness of the test. The point is the shape it leaves behind. A confederation that moves together. When Modu takes the morning air, the horses already face the same way. When he gives the small signal, and in the best stories it's small because the best leaders prefer inevitable to noisy, he can pour 1,000 riders into a valley like water finding an old path. Some say he learned to command by listening to his father's rivals argue over maps. Some say he learned by looking up at star lines and imagining the constellations as wings, left wing, right wing, like the titles of the confederation that would come. Whatever the lessons, you can hear the result. A hoofbeat that starts many beats apart and ends as one sound. The first people to understand how much Modu has changed the steppe are not his friends. They are his neighbours. The Donghu to the east feel that pressure as a hand on the shoulder, steady and inarguable. The The Yuezhi to the west feel it like a wind that moves a camp even when the pegs are stout. The chronicles will record that the Donghu are defeated, that the Yuezhi are pressed from certain pastures and pushed to new ones far away. You will hear this told over a bowl of hot broth by a border trader who swears he once saw a Yuezhi archer's quiver beaded with gold that caught the dawn like a line of small suns. He will shrug and say, "Things move," and he won't just mean camps. Modu is remembered for his horses and his bowstrings, but the more you listen, the more you hear that he is also remembered for his patience. The confederation he shapes is like a lattice of obligations, stretched across grassland, anchored by gifts and by the quiet knowledge that winter exists. Winter is not the enemy here, it's the tutor. It teaches you to bring extra, to count days in hay, to value warm words that can cross a frozen river. It teaches something else too, that pressure applied at the right time can shape any neighbour, even a powerful one with palaces and bronze seals. South of the open grass lies a barrier many people will later call a wall. It is a collection of walls, in fact, and mounds and watchtowers, stitched to ridgelines like seams. You will see it called the Great Wall, but here, now, it is something gentler. An administrative spine, a conversation written in tamped earth and brick. Look at it at dawn, and it resembles a long, polite suggestion running along the land. Perhaps here? Perhaps stop here. The Xiongnu negotiate with the wall as they negotiate with the winter. Not to break it particularly, but to breathe around it, to test its gates, to use its logic the way a river uses a boulder, as a way to learn where the deep channels are. One winter, the Han Emperor who stitched the first part of his dynasty together, Liu Bang, rides north and finds himself surrounded near Baideng. No need to count lances. The important numbers are shelter and days of food. You can tell a lot about history by where the cooks stand, and in this story the cooks stand on the side that doesn't need a road to find more. The Xiongnu don't melt away, they stay like frost. And then the season does what it always does with stubborn men. It requests a decision. The answer is a form of hekin, peace warmed by gifts, by regulated trade, by marriages that turn strangers into relatives who must politely put chairs out for one another. If you have ever solved a problem with a care package and a long letter, you have practiced a neighbourhood version of hekin. Once agreed, it becomes a rhythm. Envoys ride, bolts of silk change hands, horses are tallied and admired, border markets swell up like tents after a rain. Some of the best stories in the Hekin years are small. They happen at the edges, at dawn, when the guards drink something hot and hold their bowls between their hands, the way you do when you claim the warmth counts as a meal. A trader unrolls silk that catches the light and seems to pour like water. A shepherd-turned-broker runs his palm along a strip of felt and tells you how many days in a snowstorm it might buy you. A young official, tired from the road, writes a note that will become a line in a chronicle later, about the taste of mare's milk, about the way a child in the market can untie knots faster than any clerk. Rumours in such places are practical. Someone says there will be a raid not here but there. Someone says the Chanyu's horse has a white star like a spilled spoon of salt. Someone says the silk for the next agreement is already dyed and flattering to the eye. These are the kinds of rumours that keep people alive and well fed, which is to say they keep history moving. Inside the felt homes there is a careful economy of motion. You sit low, you keep the good objects close. The sewing needles in a small case, the whetstone, the knife with a bone handle polished dark by many thumbs. When a child reaches for the bow, you tell them not yet, and when a grandmother reaches for the kettle, you lift it for her, because the kettle is heavy, and respect should look like something you can see. Diet is the bread book of a place, and here the pages are meat, dairy, and precious grain brought from a valley or a market. Broth is not just a meal, but a measure. It keeps a voice smooth in a wind. It turns a long ride into a story you can tell while you drink. In the corner is a travel chest with bronze buckles that glint like little sermons about craft and exchange. You open it and find textiles that travelled farther than you have. Patterns and threads that say information moves not just as words, but as colour under the hand. The past leaves a few things we can hold, and among them are the Noi Nula burials, where centuries later people will lift from the earth textiles so refined that silence seems the only applause appropriate. You do not need the exact designs to feel what they mean. Trade, care, distance turn to closeness by the act of making. The graves also speak in the careful voice of archaeology about a society that honoured its leaders with things acquired across great spaces. Far from being a blank between cities, the steppe shows itself as a house with doors in every direction. The Han court in the south debates as courts always do. Is a gift a cost or an investment? Is a border a bruise or a handshake? When Emperor Wu sits in the big chair, the arguments grow spurs. The policy that unfurls is to press the steppe power at the seams, to trim its supply and bend its roads, especially the road that curves along river and desert at the waist of the world, the Hexi Corridor. Generals with calm faces, Wei Qing and Huo Qubing, ride out with calculation and trained horses. The chronicles tally victories measured in captured herds and empty depots, but in camp talk the summary is simpler. Certain places are no longer safe for wintering. Certain markets no longer swing open as easily. Certain paths are watched by men with better maps than last year. In a felt home under a sky that feels closer on some nights, the council meets. You can tell how tense the times are by what kind of tea is poured, and how many times the brazier is poked without actual need. The Chan Yu speaks. The left and right wing leaders answer. There is the old loyalty of Modu's shaping still holding, but it is no longer a simple shut of the door against the wind. The Confederation learns what all large families learn. Sometimes you must agree to disagree about where to graze. Sometimes a promise is a river that pulls apart even while it flows in the same direction. So the Xiongnu divide, southern and northern, in the first century before the Common Reckoning. The southern branch leans toward cooperation with the Han, not because of love or fear exactly, but because there are good markets and safer winters when you nod to the hand that sits on many grain jars. The northern branch rides away toward colder places and a horizon that even seasoned men find wide. Inevitably, people talk. Did the northern riders keep going and going, past Altai and memory, until their descendants brushed shoulders with rivers that know European names? Are the Huns of later chronicle and terror the same as the Xiongnu of these older tents? The truth arrives like a cautious horse, step by step. Scholars map similarities in names and objects. They draw lines and then erase them, and then draw them again in dotted strokes like caravan tracks. The rumours are older than the arguments. In a border tavern you can hear someone swear that a cousin's cousin met a rider who had a grandmother who remembered a tale of a journeys that never turned back. Another man says that all winds eventually meet somewhere over open water. The cook pours broth and nods at both, because broth understands continuity and change at once. You don't have to settle the question tonight. The stars are not in a hurry to finish their rounds, and the horses chew as if their work is the most sensible work in the world. You notice again the small things that keep a life in motion. A strap repaired neatly with rawhide thongs. A knot tied in a way you haven't seen before but will now use forever. A child, quick with numbers, counting lambs, then counting arrows, then counting out the time between beacons as if it were just another flock to keep. When you ask the word for fast, they tell you 2 or 3 words and explain how each belongs to a different kind of motion. Fast like a horse in the open, fast like a message, fast like a cloud crossing the moon that makes everyone look up. The composite bow is a teacher standing in the corner. It is made of pieces that don't naturally wish to cooperate. Wood, horn, sinew, coaxed into one purpose. You hold it and feel the invented harmony. You don't need numbers to know the thing can send a message far, and not only to an enemy. A bow in a tent is a promise to bring meat home and to protect the small, ordinary piece of a morning. The archer running a thumb along the bow's back knows when the weather has been dry for weeks by the way the sinew sings. There are tests for everything here, but not all tests are fierce. Most are patient. Can your saddle carry you through a whole day without complaint? Can your tent keep out the snow that eats the fire? Can your promise arrive as promised? There are markets designed by states, and then there are markets that happen because humans have hands and curiosity. On some borders, the official market takes place behind careful lines, watched by men who understand tariffs. On other days, not as official, a little fair appears because one person told another person that they'd be near a certain hill. And wouldn't it be pleasant to exchange a strip of embroidered cloth for some quiet news? You learn to read the signs. Extra smoke near a watchtower can mean a rumour is being cooked. One too many men adjusting a saddle can mean someone is lingering on purpose. Information travels in bundles. Wool, then a word, then some salt. That is how peace holds too. Not only by proclamation, but by 100 everyday trades of care. A visiting envoy learns to sit and not rush. The hosts have deeply learned the art of comfortable slowness, which is not the same thing as delay. Slowness allows the useful truths to arrive on their own feet. Why say no loudly when you can drink a little more and say maybe? Why say yes immediately when a longer yes, wrapped in silk and delivered in spring, will be worth more to everyone? You begin to understand why the steppe says empire can be carried. An empire that can't fold into a cart isn't your kind of empire. At night, the elders speak. Not to frighten, but to remind. The old days were not better. They were only different, and they taught the same unglamorous disciplines: mending, sharing, moving when the grass asks you to move. They tell the story of a year when the snow came early and stayed longer than patience, and how the people used every map they had, including songs and the way that birds leave the ground when they intend to leave for good. They say that in the spring that followed, the lambs had a certain brightness in their voices, and that the first market tasted like a festival, even if nobody called it one. You sleep to the sound of tether ropes and wake to a day already halfway born. The riders tie their hair with simple cords and review the small gold of the horizon for weather. A messenger rides in with a hand raised in greeting, and the gesture looks like the silhouette of a heron landing. The words they bring are not grand. They are about pastures and cousins, about a minor quarrel at a market 2 days ago, and how it ended with laughter. You watch how lightly the big things, alliances, seasons, strategies, rest on the bed of daily competence. It's like a kettle on a tripod. The stew is what you notice, but it stays because the legs are sound. Governments like to be remembered as decisions. People like to be remembered as gestures. The Han decide on bigger campaigns. The Xiongnu answer with bigger spaces. Wei Qing and Huo Kubing punctuate the steppe with winter campfires of their own. There are victories to count, the seizure of supplies, the quieting of routes. But if you shade your eyes and look far across the grass, what you see are not the little flags you might place on a map. You see persistence, of riding, of tent raising, of the bough hung carefully by the door so the child doesn't bump it, of grandmother hands folding cloth that came from somewhere so remote it feels like a rumour until you touch it. In this world you measure time not by months but by what the horses know. They know the early spring that's really late winter. They know the grain that will be waiting, or not, near a friendly border. They know the way a man rides when he carries news that will open a market or close one for a season. The horse also knows when you're learning. It forgives a little lurch, as if to say, yes, but keep your heel quiet. Yes, but look where you mean to go. Some evenings the talk turns to the shapeless questions. Where do we come from? Where are we going? The elders answer with what they have, long thoughts and long stories. They talk about a headquarters farther north where the Chanyu keeps a kind of court, the place some records will later call Longcheng, Dragon City, though whether it is one place or a moving title is the kind of argument that warms historians in libraries. On the ground, it means there are places you return to often enough that your horse expects water there. It means there are celebrations that require certain songs and certain cups. It means that power is not always the noise of command, but often the quiet confidence that people will find you when the moon reaches a certain weight in the sky. A border farmer, one of the settled kind, tells you that if he fears anything, it is not the riders themselves. It is the scale of the land that rides with them. They bring the sky, he says, not unkindly. When the riders come to the market, the sky seems bigger, and the farmer feels the tug to stand under it longer than his chores allow. He smiles to admit this. He sells them wheat and buys hides. They share a joke that relies on a word that works only in both languages at once, and they laugh in the correct proportion. Later he tells his children that the steppe people respect the same things he does. Warmth, honesty, good gear, steady animals, and the useful rumour that says there will be rain next Tuesday. This last one is always welcomed and always wrong in the exact same way. When the Confederation splits, you expect a rupture. But what you see looks more like water seeking new ground. The southern Xiongnu draw closer to the Han, administratively and literally. There are offices with shared walls, and a new kind of paperwork grows like moss. The northern Xiongnu pull their maps a little tighter and ride out toward mountains that hold winter like a deep breath. The split is not a clean cut. Families have cousins on both sides, and at certain markets people stand a little apart and then a little closer, because life is long and the world is small if you count it by faces instead of miles. Trade tries its best to ignore politics, as trade always does, and sometimes it even succeeds. In the decades that follow, there are leaders whose names will be carved and saved in books you will never read at night in a tent, because books and low light do not get along. There are envoys who defect because their hearts fail at the thought of leaving the wind. There are marriages that feel like treaties and treaties that feel like marriages, with all the familiar complications and all the familiar hopes. Through it all, the bowstrings are kept oiled, the kettles wiped dry, the saddles rest at day's end on their stands like faithful dogs you pat without thinking. A rumour comes back from the far west about cities where grapes grow so abundantly they hang like arguments no one bothers to finish. Another rumour says there are seas where the water can lift a ship as easily as a cook lifts a lid, and yet the riders do not leave now. They stretch, but not beyond the shape of their days. The steppe has its own abundance, time to talk, space to turn, the dignity of useful work, a sky that looks the same to the child learning to count sheep, and to the Chanyu wondering if the next envoy should bring copper bowls or a deeper promise. Scarcity visits, as it visits every place, but the people here are practiced in receiving it like a modest, unwelcome guest, fed, warmed, and sent on its way when the grass permits. If you ask what they are proud of, they won't say victory. They will say readiness. They will show you knots that come apart when you pull one true cord. They will tell you how to read a track, not to hunt a person, but to find a lost foal. They will show you how to secure a felt flap against a storm in a way that doesn't tire the leather. And if you ask for a big story, one that touches empires, they will point with their chin at the place where the sky meets the land and say, "There." Meaning, the big story has always been the road itself, and the patience of people who know how to ride it without getting lost in their own importance. Night deepens. The horses are a little nearer. Whether to keep warm or to keep company is unclear. The kettle does not boil. It hums at a level that lets conversation continue. You realise you have not thought about cities in several days, and this is not a critique of cities. It is an observation about how the heart scales itself to open spaces when given a chance. You think about Modu again, and the way a single clever person can draw a scattered people into a shape that matters. You think about the Han emperors, differently clever, drawing sand and stone into long spines that carried not just soldiers, but ideas about who belongs where. You think about the way those ideas touched, the way they pressed against one another like stones in a riverbed, shaping the water in the only language stone knows. You finish your broth. The bowl is simple and good in the hand, and you find that you will miss it when you go. In the morning you will ride with a small group to the edge of a plain that looks like every other plain, until someone points and says, "There is the old border." There will be nothing to see at first, and then, as your horse's ears come forward, you will notice the way the land differs by not much. A ridge here, a pile of stones there. The border will be made, as they usually are, from the agreements people keep out of habit and the stories they tell over bowls like the one you hold now. For now, sleep if you can. The tent breathes with you. The felt does its slow magic of keeping the warm things near and the cold things at a distance polite enough to be admirable. The wind makes its case on the other side of the wall and loses. A messenger arrives late and is fed. Someone in the next tent plays a bone flute with a tune that doesn't need to be named. In the morning, there will be talk of markets and scouts, of a winter pasture that looks promising, of an envoy due from the south carrying a letter that will nod toward Hekin without saying the word. In the morning there will be the usual humour, about horses that pretend to be taller than they are, about boots that squeak like inexperienced negotiators, about the sheep that keep their own tally of people. Laughter pitches low. Even jokes travel at a walk here, so they can be enjoyed by all. If you step outside once more before you sleep, you will find the sky unembarrassed by its riches. It gives you the path you need in small dots of fire that refuse to tire. You remember how the night began, with horses, with felt, with a kettle's hum, and you are eased by the fact that it ends the same. No sudden turning, no trumpets, just the long, steady line of a people who learn to move together under the same patient stars, and who, by gifting winter a seat at the table, built something that could stretch across the grass and last longer than any one rider's name. Dawn leans on the rim of the plain like a careful hand on a sleeping shoulder. The felt flap breathes once, twice, and you step out into air that tastes faintly of ash and milk. Horses stand in a loose crescent, tails switching, breath-making brief ghosts that immediately forget to haunt. Somewhere a bowstring is tested with a low, satisfied hum, the sound a craftsman makes when a familiar tool answers yes. The kettle inside the tent keeps its promise. It hums and does not boil. The sky has turned from deep ink to the colour of polished bone. Under that sky, the riders are already making lines. They do not hurry. They assemble the way dew assembles, quietly, everywhere at once. Saddle pads are shaken, girths tugged and checked, a strap rethreaded, a knife slid into a case where it will neither rattle nor surprise a thigh at a gallop. A child collects bone toggles that fell during the night's repairs and returns them like a tax collector who has discovered generosity at last. The women tether foals, fold bedding into neat rolls, and lay a hand on a brazier to capture a moment of warmth, as if warmth were a coin that could be spent later. You feel the camp's pulse, slow, deliberate, competent, like a word spoken by someone who is rarely wrong and never loud. Into this morning walks the name you have heard in fireside songs, Modu. Some later scribes will write him as Maudun. He will be called Chanyu, supreme ruler, by the people who ride with him and by the people who must now plan around him. But before any of that, he is a son whose father wonders whether the future can be convinced to arrive politely. Those are other stories, told in winter, about tests that made loyalty visible, stories that prefer implication to spectacle, as the steppe does. The shape of the tale is a lesson in what power requires. The point of the tale is what power creates. It creates edges. It creates a choir out of scattered throats. Modu's quiet signal is not a shout. It is the way 1,000 small practices become a habit large enough to change maps. If you watch him ride, you notice the economy. How he spares his horse with a posture learned from long travel. How his hand rests near the rein, not on it. Because partnership is lighter than control. If you listen to the words around him, you hear a new grammar building. Left wing, right wing. Messengers like beads on a string that circles whole seasons. Gifts as weather. Promises that are stored like hay. You hear a theory of distance, that to rule a place with no walls, you must think like wind and act like water. The confederation he shapes is not a thing you can stack like bricks. It is stitched, not piled. It gathers chiefs the way a river gathers tributaries, by making it obvious where the main current is going and what good might be found along the bank. There are councils where decisions are poured, steaming, into bowls, and there are moments when the decision is simply the assembling of riders into 2 long arcs that close around a valley-like parentheses. The left wing and the right wing become both military and administrative theatre. Men who know which winter pastures belong to which clan, who can say, without looking at a list, how many foals are owed in levy from a family that traded summer shade for autumn water. To hold such a shape, you need more than courage. You need timekeepers. The horse is the first, the bow the second, and a well-tuned rumour is the third. Under Modu, rumour becomes a tool sharpened against the grain of distance. He knows that a message too late is a truth drowned, that a warning too early is a scarecrow that teaches crows to laugh. So he builds the habit of messengers, young riders with narrow eyes from looking far, who can tell a good horse by sound and a bad mood by the way a man adjusts his belt. They carry not only words but also the weight of being expected, and there is no better spur than expectation. A good rumour, like a good arrow, lands where it was meant to land. What does the centre look like when the edges are always in motion? Some call it Long Cheng, Dragon City, though whether that is a single place or a moving title is a matter for pens and winter rooms. To you, walking there on a day when the light decides to be kind, it looks like a court that has learned to travel without losing its shape. There are banners with patterns old enough to smell of stories. There is a corral where the best horses stand with the bored arrogance of talent. There are tents with thicker felt, poles carved with small spirals that make your fingers itch to trace them. There are places where news arrives first, and places where decisions are sent out with a gesture so small it might be mistaken for easing a wrinkle in a sleeve. Within that moving centre is a more secret centre, the habit of the gift. Gifts here are not baubles. They are agreements with bodies, robes that warm the spine that must keep its composure, iron that remembers a shape when shaped by the right hand, bowls that hold enough broth for an envoy to change his mind. Modu distributes in a way that would satisfy an accountant and an auntie. Fairly, with memory and a talent for knowing who needs an extra ladle now, for the sake of the next winter. Some gifts are horses, and those are the gifts that make other gifts possible. Others are rights. The right to graze a certain slope when the wind does what it always does in late autumn. The right to show up at a border and expect a smile from a particular guard because his cousin is married to your cousin, and both cousins have the same clever child who counts faster than a taxman. The Confederation's new clarity is first seen by the jealous and the nearly wise. The Donghu to the east notice that the odd shouts from last year's hunts have become a chorus that arrives on time. They feel the pressure like a blanket that is not heavy, but is everywhere. The Yuezhi to the west feel something like the opposite of a favour, a certainty that the places they thought would always be theirs are now merely places they like, and that liking is not the same as holding. The stories will reduce these feelings to a few lines. Defeat here, retreat there. But if you had been sitting on a hill with a good view and a modest lunch, you would have seen, first, a new confidence. You would have seen riders cresting a ridge in a line so straight it seemed the ridge had grown to suit them. You would have seen dust that promised more dust, supply trains with better knots, boys with extra arrows in bags that didn't creak, a cart whose wheels were greased with a recipe that did not skimp on tallow. You would have watched the steppe learn a different grammar for the word soon. When the Donghu test this grammar with the demand dressed as a request, Modu answers in the original language of the steppe, presence. Not a parade. Parades are for cities, but a gathering of hooves and backs and bows so complete it erases possibility for anyone standing in front of it. The fight that follows is retold as a change in weather. The Donghu's certainty cracks the way ice cracks when the river underneath begins to think about April. The arrows do their work without asking to be famous. The horses do their work without asking for praise. In the aftermath there is silence, and then there is the clatter of men discovering with some amazement that they are still alive. After that comes the work the chronicles ignore. Counts, bandages, apologies, the returning of borrowed gear, the careful walking of the ground to collect every arrow that can be used again. News of this winter's lesson travels farther than the horses. The Yuezhi measure their options with the sober yardstick of people who don't want to become a lesson themselves. They shift. The steppe does not like empty spaces, only temporarily unoccupied ones, and the moving of the Yuezhi opens lanes to new markets, and closes other lanes behind an edge of caution. Traders adjust. A man who sold felt last year now sells iron hoops for wheels. A woman who embroidered borders on robes now embroiders a pattern that travels better. A strip that can be traded, sewn on, taken off, traded again. In the tales told to children, the Yuezhi's departure is blamed on a quarrel with the sky. In the accounts told to accountants, it is blamed on arithmetic. Both versions agree on the outcome. The map now breathes differently. Modu's court breathes with it. He builds a bench of leaders who can think in contingencies and smile convincingly at men they intend to pressure without speaking the word pressure. The left and right wings become not merely halves of an army, but halves of a mind. One knows the grasses that stay sweet under snow, the other knows which passes are clear 2 days earlier than rumour admits. Together they create a usable future. They also create a style. In this style, no horn is blown if a hand signal will do. No grand vow is made if a smaller, more achievable vow will result in warm hands and a sharpened knife at the right moment. It is an aesthetics of sufficiency. A good phrase for any government. The little things tell you the style is working. The saddle stands are more numerous. That means horses are being rested, not merely used. The bow cases are better stitched. That means bows are paying for the leather that shelters them. A young man with a scar that made him handsome to some and interesting to others counts out bundles of arrows and does not miscount. That means the teacher who taught him numbers was not only patient but respected. Respect is a currency that buys time, and time is what you spend on plans you want to succeed. Sometimes power must be shown, because theatre is not only for cities. A great hunt is arranged in a valley whose walls echo well. The plan is not about animals. It is about the border of certainty being drawn where certainty has not visited in a while. The riders start wide, circling in, singing the map songs that set the pace. Dogs run low and long, hawks trace parentheses in the air. The horses find that middle gait that can carry a man and his thoughts all day without complaint. At the centre, skill is displayed. A shot that seems impossible until it is not. A rope thrown with such good manners it lands exactly where it is welcome. When the meat is carried back, the portions are measured publicly with a fairness that suggests either virtue or very good calculation. Here, those are cousins. The valley will remember, so will the neighbours. There is a story, there are always stories, about how Modu sits one evening with a map that is not a map. It is a circle drawn in the dirt with 4 small stones on the edge. 1 stone is east, 1 west, 1 south, 1 north. Inside the circle are a few lines like the ribs of a shallow bowl. He moves 1 stone a little. The line inside changes meaning. He moves another stone the width of a thumb. A path opens that was not open before. A child watching says, "You are playing." Modu says, "Yes." The child says, "What is the game?" Modu says, "Tomorrow." If this story is fiction, it is the kind that told the truth anyway. Not everything is arrangement and outcome. There is also the business of belief, which under Modu grows like smoke, thin, pervasive, hard to hold, essential to warmth. The sky is acknowledged without being domesticated. Rites are observed by men who do not cry when the wind is strong, and by women who know which grass to burn when you want a certain smell to follow a certain name. There is a wordless agreement about the horse as friend, tool, altar. A foal is greeted with something like a blessing, and something exactly like a checklist. Both are admissions that life is serious and we would like it to continue. Envoys arrive from places that have learned to pronounce Chanyu with approximately the right conviction. They bring things that sparkle at dusk and things that only sparkle in ledgers. Assurances, recalibrations, the kind of compliments that can be unstitched and resewn to fit any season. They see a court that radiates pace rather than posture. They sit on good rugs inside well-mended walls of felt, and drink what is offered at the temperature it was intended to be drunk. They find themselves volunteering concessions while telling themselves these are strategies. When they speak of the wall to the south, its length, its labour, its idea, they do not see a flinch. Modu speaks of walls the way a fox speaks of rivers, real, impressive in flood, crossable in winter, and made in the final arithmetic of attention. At night, Modu listens. He listens to the men who exaggerate because they love victory and to the men who understate because they love craft. He listens to women who know where people actually live, and to old men who know where people used to live and why it didn't work. He listens to the horse handlers because horses tell the truth first, to the cooks because cooks hear everything, to the children because children will repeat what their parents told them, adding only relevant embellishments. He listens because tomorrow's quiet signal will only work if today's different silences were understood. A winter comes that is so honest it feels personal. The grass sits low. Rivers forget how to be water for weeks at a time. The stars distance themselves as if not wishing to be blamed. This is the kind of winter that measures leadership. There are cuts, of travel, of plans, of boasts. There is saving, of hay, of humour, of judgment. Modu orders movements that look like surrender to men who have not seen as many winters, and like prophecy to women who have seen more. Camps are pulled closer to certain walls, not because the walls are loved, but because they break the wind that breaks horses. More lambs live than expected. Fewer men boast than usual. Envy sleeps because it is too cold to wake. When the thaw comes, it has the taste of competence. In the thaw, the envoys come again, noses pinked by the weather, and by the wine they were offered to remind them they are not home. They ask for less than they asked before. They speak of markets with a sudden interest in the details of scales and fees. They ask politely where the Chanyu will be in the 4th month and in the 7th, because gifts are punctual not by nature but by training. Modu answers not with places but with sentences that make places unnecessary. We will be where the grass is and the wind is reasonable and the world wishes to talk. It is a sentence that looks like a shrug and performs like a schedule. Meanwhile, the young men compete in not quite martial acts that are martial enough for anyone paying attention, racing over broken ground, shooting at targets that move like real things, wrestling in styles that teach when to give ground to win ground later. The young women compete too, in songs and stitches and the exacting arithmetic of arranging a household that must be picked up at a word and rebuilt from memory. A visiting scribe tries to write a poem about this and gives up, then writes a list instead. The list is better. It is a list of verbs to mend, to lash, to fold, to warm, to wait, to ride, to return. We speak of Modu as if he's always central, but the truth is both less dramatic and more interesting. He is central because everyone else is. He can ask a village to move 2 days early and trust the village to invent the good reasons that will make it feel like the village's idea. He can ask a chief to eat less this winter, and know the chief's sister will become a hero by portioning the stew with ruthless kindness. He can signal a raid not to conquer, but to remind. And it will remind because the men who ride out understand that reminding is also an economy, a way of keeping certain goods moving and certain stories plausible. This is empire as a verb, not a noun. It is what you do, not what you have. There is a scholar, imagined or real, who writes that Modu organised 10,000 household units and named them with such gusto that the names themselves grew hooves. Another writes that such numbers are metaphors, that they meant many, the way a grandmother's moment can secretly mean an afternoon. The people on the ground do not care which is truer. They care that when they gather, the right men stand in the right places and the right women hold the ropes that pull the right tents tight. They care that when a beacon is lit, it is not because someone is bored. They care that when the Chanyu says tomorrow, it arrives. Not sloppily, not surprised. The Donghu are now a caution written into advice. Do not be as certain as they were, someone says to a son who believes himself original. The Yuezhi are now a rumour at the edge of thought. They found another valley, someone says to a daughter, who's considering a marriage that will send her 2 days farther from her mother. And Modu is now a problem for the south that cannot be solved by a single winter. South, a court debates whether to name this problem a feature and build around it, or to name it an obstacle and starve it of purchase. Those debates will occupy other rooms and other parts of this story. For now, the Xiongnu ride with a confidence that is neither swagger nor humility. It is the quiet of a plan breathing. One evening, Modu rides to look at the edge of a wall. It is a place where the wall rests against a hill and seems momentarily natural, like a straight thought in a mind that enjoys circles. He sits his horse and watches the guards who watch him. Nobody shouts. Nobody pretends not to see. The horse scrapes the dirt once, as if to remind itself it has legs. Modu studies the angle of the slope, the way the wall meets the sky, the distance between a watchtower and a certain stand of trees. He does not count. Counting would be rude. He measures with the habit of a man who has learned that the world is mostly repetitive with small, meaningful variations. He turns the horse and goes. The guards breathe out. One says, "He's shorter than I imagined." Another says, "He's taller than I hoped." A third says nothing. The third will be promoted. At the moving court, a craftsman presents a bow with an inlay that is a map if you know how to read wood. The horn is polished so well it keeps a small version of the world in its curve. Modu holds it the way a man holds a child who does not like to be held, but will allow it from him. He draws it half as far as it can go and stops, because testing is not the same as demanding. He gives it back with 2 words that mean many. Good tool. The craftsman will tell this story for years, but he will always tell it short out of respect for the two words. If you sleep in that court, the night hums with competent hope. Men and women murmur plans you will never know because you are not the person who must know them. The kettle keeps doing its job. The felt keeps the tentative cold at a respectful distance. If you wake and step out, you see the constellations that have never filed a complaint about being overworked. A young rider walks by with a message folded so small it could be lost by a sneeze. He does not sneeze. You think, this is a grand thing, and also an ordinary thing, and the grandness depends on the ordinary the way a tent depends on its smallest pegs. By the time Modu grows older, the Confederation's habits are older than that. Men who were children when he tilted maps with his thumb now tilt spoons to taste stew and pronounce it adequate, which is praise here. Women who remembered a time when tongues stumbled over Chanyu now correct pronunciation with a kindness that does not feel like correction. Children new to numbers are told histories in measures they understand. This many winters until that trade road opened. This many foals until our family was allowed the slope with the willow. This many songs until the envoy stopped looking over his shoulder every time a horse snorted. Not all days are good. A trusted man fails without malice. A sister's husband speaks out of turn. A horse steps in a hole at a bad moment. The wind lies about its plans. Modu is not a magician. He's a manager of the plausible. He balances. He builds redundancy where flattery would be easier. He feeds the dogs first when feeding them first will prevent a quarrel with teeth later. He demotes quietly and promotes publicly. He makes generosity visible and resentment private. He permits a small quarrel to proceed when it will vent a larger one. These are facts so ordinary they hardly count as facts until you realise empires have fallen for want of them. One spring a singer composes a song with new verses about how the world tilted a little, when Modu's horse stamped just so on a day near the river. The song is charming and travels quickly, as charm does. A groom hears it and laughs because he was there and remembers the horse stamping for a different reason. He says nothing. He thinks, let the story be good. The truth had its turn. In a generation, the song will be cited by a poet as proof of destiny. In 2 generations, a boy will ask who Destiny is and whether she lives near the market with the sweet cakes. Someone will say yes. That boy will buy 2 cakes and share one with his sister. Destinies thrive on such logistics. Slowly, the borders of the possible move. A chief who once avoided a certain pass now uses it in late summer when the wind is agreeable. A trader who once counted silk as an event now counts it as inventory. A woman who once hated the taste of fermented milk now tolerates it because it is the taste of agreements kept. South, the scribes note these small movements with the earnestness of men who want to be remembered for noticing. North, the riders translate such noticing into the practical arithmetic of hay. East and west, the steppe listens to itself and decides, with remarkable frequency, to continue. At last there is a night that asks for a new kind of quiet. The moving court is still, that strange stillness living things achieve when they are about to become memory. The horseherd rustles. A few foals test the limits of rope and are persuaded by patience. The stars keep up their end of the bargain, which is to be there. Modu sleeps, and whether he dreams is not recorded. In the morning men will speak softly but efficiently. The habits will hold. The left and the right will do as left and right ought. The gifts will be redistributed with a logic that will look, to an outsider, like affection. And somewhere a child will be told, we did not begin with him, and we will not end without him, but we did learn how to stand while moving, and how to move while standing. The rumours begin then, as rumours do when an era is politely changing seats. Some say Modu's horse bowed its head twice before walking away to a place horses supposedly go when they are done with human hopes. Some say a hawk circled 3 times and then arrowed toward the west as if to carry news in the old fashion. Some say a cup was found unbroken where it ought to have cracked in frost, and that this means something but nobody agrees what. The only rumour worth forwarding is the one the cooks tell, that the kettles were kept full and the bowls were kept moving, and that no one left hungry while the decisions were made. If you want to know whether a people will survive a turning, ask the cooks. When the new Chanyu is raised, what rises with him is not just a man, but a method. The method says, assemble widely, act precisely. It says, The centre is a promise, not a dot. It says, you keep power by putting it down where others can use it, because then they will pick it up when you're not looking and carry it in the right direction as if it were theirs. It says, the wall to the south is not a wall so much as a long habit, and habits can be negotiated with tea and time and the occasional reminder that horses have their own opinions. It says, tomorrow is a game played with stones and lines. Yes, but also with bread and patience, and whether you chose to listen last night when someone unusual said something useful. By now the neighbours have adjusted. Some sleep better, some not at all. Tongues learn new words for north that are really new words for that place from which arrangements come. Traders practice smiles that show teeth only when necessary. A boy from a settled village and a girl from a riding camp meet by accident at a market and trade jokes so quietly that their parents will later pretend not to be delighted. A scribe who has always believed in the narrative of stone wonders for a daring minute about the narrative of felt. He writes a sentence he does not show anyone. An empire you can fold is not a smaller empire. The kettle hums, the felt breathes, the hoofbeats resume their work of measuring days. In the south, a sovereign named Liu Bang reads reports that sound like weather forecasts. Pressure here, clearing there, a front moving in from the north with a confidence that would be admirable if it were not inconvenient. He thinks about roads. He thinks about walls as nouns and then as verbs. He thinks about emissaries with charming smiles and stiffer spines than advertised. He thinks about winter, which has lately gone into the diplomacy business uninvited. He puts down a bamboo slip and rubs his eyes. He says, we will see. He means, we will plan. And so, because one quiet signal can carry farther than anyone intends, the rider's habit will touch the emperor's habit. Plans will be drawn in rooms where the air smells of lacquer and ink. Scouts will be sent who can count not only men and horses, but also hayricks and crows. Agreements will be proposed that will taste sweet and later bitter and finally necessary. There will be a place called Baideng, and there the wind will have more to say than the swords do, but that is a winter in a later part. For now, Modu's signal continues to travel, still quiet, still understood. Men rise to it without thinking. Women prepare for it without asking whether it is deserved. Children sleep through it and wake into it and assume correctly that the world has always sounded like this. The day closes with a familiar ceremony. Not the lifting of a cup, but the setting down of tools. Bow strung, then unstrung. Horse brushed where the coat sweats and dries into misshapen maps. Knife wiped with the same care you would offer a guest, and for the same reason, you intend to see it again. The stars lift their faint music, and the tent repeats the refrain you learned on your first night. The kettles hum, the felt's patience, the hoofbeats promise. You do not need to be told what all this means. You feel it in the way your shoulders settle without orders. You feel it in the way tomorrow has already been partially assembled from today's competence. Here, under a sky that never remembers to be small, Modu's legacy is not a statue or a line on a stone. It is a way of moving that does not scatter the heart. It is a way of gathering that does not break the road. It is a government that can be packed before dawn and still arrive by noon with its dignity intact. It is a rumour that turned out to be a plan that turned out to be a people who know how to stand together in a place where the wind loves to test the meaning of together. If you listen, really listen, you can hear the next part whispering in from the south. A winter, a standoff, a negotiation conducted in the old language of survival. You pull the felt a little tighter around your shoulders. The kettle hums its agreement. The horses breathe. The stars approve. And the plain waits, as it always does, for the next sentence. The morning comes on as if poured from a clay jar, slow, careful, a little thick with cold. Frost has made lace of the weeds that cling to the rocks, and the horses breathe clouds that look briefly like gossip, escaping in a hurry before it decides to stay quiet. You lift the felt flap and step into a winter that has opinions. Somewhere beyond the whitening plain lies a shape not born of grass or wind. A wall, a town, a cluster of roofs where cooks count cabbage, and soldiers pretend not to think about their toes. Between your tent and that town the land is not empty. It's occupied by a logic, Modu's logic, that rides without hurrying and arrives without being announced. This morning we stand where two habits meet, the habit of steppe mobility and the habit of city promise. The place the chronicles will name is Baideng. There is a story about how it begins, and like most stories that reach us through time and careful ink, it's both rough and polished. The Han Emperor, Liu Bang, the man who once carried a bamboo tally staff and then carried a whole country, has ridden north in winter, which is a kind of compliment. We take you seriously enough to come in the hard season. He expects danger. He has lived long enough with fortune to keep a change of clothes and an extra plan. His court has advised him to steady the border, to quiet raids and rumours both, to show the flag in a place where flags like to come loose. Flags in winter do not always agree. The Xiongnu do not perform. They gather. They do not charge like a fan's idea of cavalry. They settle like a cloud that knows the shape of the hill beneath it. The Emperor looks out and sees not a battlefield, but a calendar. Days of food, days of wood for fires, days of good morale before jokes become complaints and complaints become ideas. You can count soldiers. You can't count the speed of cold. The cooks tell the truth first. They begin to measure the stew with a seriousness that moves the story forward. You can tell what a day will become by how a cook lifts a ladle. Today is a careful day. Baideng is not a thunderclap, it's a tightening. The horses of the steppe do what they always do when asked politely. They make distance obedient. They put riders exactly where it is inconvenient to see them. The Han look up and discover themselves ringed by competence. Not chaos, competence. A new kind of line written in men and horses instead of stone and ink says, "Here." It is winter, and the word here is a strategy. If you stand with the Han, you feel the weight of numbers that are not on any roster. Firewood is a number. So is the spice that makes the salt bearable. So is the length of time a bowstring keeps its faith in cold air. There is also the number that measures how many men have wives who told them, with the perfect common sense of love, to keep their feet dry. The mind of a general is a shelf of such numbers. Liu Bang has plenty, which is why he is still alive. He has the pride of a founder and the appetites of a man who once ate standing in kitchens, and both are currently inconvenienced by the angle of the sun and the way the wind likes to snatch possibilities out of a man's mouth. If you stand with the Xiongnu, you feel something else, the patience that owns the middle of the day. The riders do not need to advance to feel clever. They need only exist where advance would have to be costly, and retreat would have to become a political argument in a warm room later. Modu's habit is a soft implacability. He has learned the mathematics of winter and applied them to people who cannot leave their walls at the speed he can change his horizon. His men are mostly warmer than the Han because they live daily with choices that honour the weather first. They can look like they are waiting when in fact they are eating. The line between ambush and picnic is narrower than you'd think. The days pass in a manner that makes quills honest. The chronicles will write encircled, and that is true if you understand the ring as a thoughtful one, with places to breathe in and out. There are probes and answers to probes. There is the fine art of learning the other army's morning routine by pretending not to notice it for 2 mornings in a row. There are shouts upwind and pretend mistakes downwind. There is certainty in the Xiongnu camp, and a graduate seminar in humility at the Han fires. Liu Bang has good advisors, and in winter good advisors are made of 3 parts: nerve, 2 parts invention, and 1 part clean bowls. One of them, people will later say the name Chen Ping, the man who knows how to arrange outcomes without knocking over chairs, proposes a shape that is older than both armies. A gift. Not surrender, not a spectacle, a gift. If the Xiongnu are a confederation glued by favoured places and favoured people, then you may be able to interrupt the glue without trying to chop it. Reach not for the Chanyu's head, reach for his household, reach for the mind that sees the moment from inside the felt walls. The rumour, that smoothest of frontline tools, says a parcel goes out from the Han side, elegant with silk and meant for women's eyes first. Rumour says the Chanyu's consort receives it, and that the gifts are measured to match the winter. Thick, warming, polite. Rumour says stern advice follows, and that the advice is this: the world is watching. The Han Emperor is not a horse to be broken, but a tree to be tended if you like shade in August. Rumour, being rumour, improves the packaging with jade and adds a line of poetry all the clerks can admire. The truth is smaller and more useful. Someone whispers where a whisper can be heard, and the hearing changes how much stubbornness can buy. Whether it was Chen Ping who directed the parcel or a nameless hand who arranged the quiet, the result arrives like a thaw that requires no speeches. Negotiations do not look like play in winter, but they are. They require the moving of a few stones to watch the lines inside the circle change shape. An envoy leaves the hand camp with very warm sleeves and the sort of dignity that looks, at a distance, like grace. He returns with a face like a lid that fits. What's inside is the shape of the Hekin arrangement, a way of turning an encirclement into a signature. Peace by gifts, peace by market, peace by marriage that can be named without naming anyone's loss. It is artful because it lets men stay themselves. You take something personally valuable and present it as political wisdom. You mitigate the quarrel by inviting it to dinner. The first version of Hekin that follows Baideng is practical. It says, there will be scheduled exchanges. There will be wives sent north with names like princess, a word that covers many women with varying degrees of consent. There will be silk, grain, wine, and pleasant promises. There will be protected border markets where guards pretend to be accountants, and accountants pretend to be guards. The steppe hears. There will be goods predictable enough to plan a winter. The court hears. There will be quiet enough to plan a harvest. Each side keeps a straight face because each side must bring this home as victory, and victory is a performance that should never be rehearsed aloud. Meanwhile, Baideng becomes a memory with footprints. The encirclement loosens not with a trumpet, but with a breath. The riders open their parentheses. They do not retreat so much as resume being available to be anywhere. The Han step back into the constellation of their walls with a lesson tucked into the robes. That stone does not hold winter the way horses do. That distance matters even to kings. That envy of mobility is a sentiment best confessed to very close friends. Liu Bang does not love this winter, but he will not hate it either. He's too shrewd to waste it. He will take the lesson and make it furniture inside his mind. The wall to the south, long, articulate, sometimes weary, resumes its daily ritual. It decants soldiers into the morning and drinks them back at night. Beacon towers practice their versions of punctuation. A small smoke for rumour, a larger fire for certainty, something in between for please come see. The earthwork in places looks like a dragon that fell asleep with its bones showing. In others, like a clean thought that remembers how to be practical. The wall is not insulted by Hekin. A wall's job is to slow a thought, to require a conversation. Hekin is a conversation that learned to walk. Now we travel with an envoy south to Chang'an, because to understand a promise you should see the room where it is kept. The road returns him to a city that rises out of farmland like intention. Market streets smell of steam and ink. Scholars make lines with brushes that will someday be mistaken for truth. Porters move with that mysterious ease men have when carrying something heavier than your understanding. The envoy reports, but he also collects. Jade that reflects faces like water. Bolts of silk so fine they make frost feel coarse. Bronze bowls that ring when flicked like a question you cannot fully answer. These will go north. They will be admired and used and mended and treasured and traded and worn and finally folded into a chest that travels farther than some king's reputations. Hekin requires markets to breathe. And so, near passes where the wall permits a sensible amount of hope, markets are declared. The declarations are written in inks and timbers. The real market is written in hooves and footsteps. Before dawn, the cold is polite. It sits in the corners and lets the brazier claim the middle of the air. Guards arrive with the patient expressions of men who remember last winter and won't be caught teasing this one. Scales, simple, honest, a little vain, are hung. Silk is unrolled carefully by hands that know softness is a kind of magic trick humans invented to reward themselves for surviving. Felt is tested by palm. It accepts the palm with equanimity. Sacks of grain are not opened. They are listened to because good grain is conversational when jostled just so. A woman sells bone needles. A child counts horses for the sheer joy of the number changing. A man from the steppe tries a city sweet and pretends it is not the best thing he has eaten. His friend coughs to help him keep his dignity. Here, rumours do useful work. Someone says the Chanyu's letter to the emperor used the phrase elder brother, which is a featherweight that can sink boats if placed cleverly. Someone else says the emperor used it back. which either solves everything or confirms the world's intricacy. The truth is that titles are a form of diplomacy measured in adverbs. Respectfully, cautiously, eventually. The letters do what good letters do. They make men feel reasonable. And when men feel reasonable, cooks can work their art without surprises. Peace is the kind of gourmet nobody asks for and everyone enjoys. Heckin does not sand away all the roughness. There are raids like hiccups in the etiquette. A herd taken here becomes compensation later. A gate closed in the morning opens in the afternoon after someone finds a misplaced stamp. A princess, that is, a woman with the right outfit and the wrong amount of choice, departs north with attendants and verses and admonitions about remembering to eat well. Somewhere a mother stares at the floor until the dust tells her its story, and she can breathe again. The marriage brings to the tent diplomacy's most ancient furniture. Awkwardness, kindness, learning, the discovery that jokes travel with only minor repairs. A year passes and someone claims the child looks exactly like an agreement. The tent laughs, gently, because the tent understands metaphors. If you turn your head slightly, the market is a school. Here people learn how much the other side likes to pretend not to bargain and exactly when to sigh. They learn that weighing silver and weighing goodwill are activities with similar wrists. They learn the shapes of refusal that still leave room for yes tomorrow. They learn weather together, what a certain wind means coming through a certain gap, how frost sounds when it has decided to stay for tea. They learn that cities and tents share the same unromantic secret. Most of survival is maintenance. Someone oils a saddle. Someone counts jars. Someone pulls one arrow from a target, glances at the grain, and smiles. Someone fixes a kettle egg with a twist of wire and a promise to fix it properly later, and later, astonishingly, arrives. Let us walk once more around the winter circle and peek into both fires. In the Han camp back then, men sleep as if the ground were bargaining with them. In the Xiongnu lines, men sleep as if the ground were kin. The difference is not moral, it is practical. It shapes how a messenger rides at dawn, and how his horse knows to avoid a patch of deceptive snow. It shapes what each man calls home in his mind when the wind is making introductions unkindly. This difference does not make enemies permanently, it makes misunderstandings likely. Hikin is an agreement that says, let's misunderstand each other profitably. From Chang'an, the letters go out with stamps that feel more important than they are, and wax that feels less warm than it looks. They speak of silk measured by bolts so numerous, a clerk required an after-lunch snack to stay cheerful, of grain enough to mean a winter without drama, of wine sufficient for a ritual but not so much as to invent new truths, of animals that carry reputations along with riders. From Longcheng, if the court was there that month, the reply arrives with a different perfume, felt and smoke, horse and hide, weather and a fragment of song in the fibres from a singer who leaned her back on the felt and remembered a tune the way some men remember borders. Now draw the lens closer still. Stand in the little market by the pass. Watch a city official try a saddle and fail charmingly. Watch a steppe woman purchase dye with a seriousness that could discipline armies. Watch a boy pretend to be a clerk and a clerk pretend to be a boy. Both are good at their parts. Watch an old man from the wall hold a bone toggle like an artifact from a kinder planet. Watch a girl from the riders touch a bronze mirror and test it against the light, as if the mirror were a person learning to listen. You could spend a life here, knowingly, and call it history. Hikin is not merely trade and marriage, it's a vow to share boredom. You will open your market on the same days. You will smile at the same jokes until you're all tired of them. You will submit to the same inspections of the same bales of wool. You will write the same encouraging lines to the same cousins. You will shake the same cups at the same angles to indicate the same degrees of hospitality. The genius of such boredom is that it prevents more dramatic kinds of entertainment. If you've ever chosen paperwork over chaos, you already speak Hikin. Still, the winter at Baideng leaves a story shadow. In Han kitchens, when cooks scold commanders for dreaming of summer campaigns during snow months, someone says, Baideng, and the argument ends. In Xiongnu tents, when a young man thinks speed is the only plan required, someone says Baideng, and he learns that patience is a pace too. The word becomes a knot you can tie quickly in a conversation to keep it from unravelling into something sharper. In the lamplight of an archive much later, a scholar will trace with a sigh how her kin stretched on and off, tightened and slackened for decades. He will write that it wasn't perfect, it wasn't. That it didn't prevent all raids, it didn't. That some of the brides were not what the poets promised, they rarely are. That the silk travelled and the horses did too, and that each side learned the shape of the other's favourite problems. He will be correct and miss the flavour. The flavour is found in the way a guard wrapped his scarf twice instead of once, in the way a woman complained that the mirror from Chang'an made her look honest, in the way a man from the steppe taught a city boy how to tie a lead rope so it releases with a flick, and the boy, to his credit, practised until he could do it while laughing. Small things accumulate around Hekin like snow under a fence. A treaty town gets a tea house where the owner learns to prepare a brew acceptable to men who dislike agreement on principle. A felt tent near the market learns the smell of lacquered bamboo slips and begins to associate bureaucracy with warmth, which may be the only way to love bureaucracy. A cobbler invents a boot stitch that resists the particular kind of wet found near the pass in late autumn, and within a year that stitch is called the border stitch, and within 3 years men are swearing by it as if it were a charm. There is also the matter of how people talk about the Great Wall now. Before Baideng, some men described it as a solution. After Baideng, wise men describe it as a tool. It is one of several tools, including market days, safe conduct passes with red cords, envoys who can pronounce new names, kept in a chest that also contains, always, the possibility of riding out fast if the conversation fails. Hekin isn't a dream of sameness. It is an agreement to be neighbours with schedules. And yet, as the seasons click onward, the steppe does what it always does. It introduces new students to the old class. Children who were infants at Baideng can now race their own small horses along the 5-furlong stretch near the stream. A boy climbs a beacon tower ladder and learns which way smoke leans when the wind plots a change. A girl in the tent counts the ribs of a fine bow and says, without ceremony, "We will need 2 more by spring." The future does not ask permission. It shows up carrying tools. The elders know this and do not take offence. They point to the door flap and say, "Tie it tight." The wind is a gossip. In the middle years after Baideng, a thoughtful quiet spreads. Quiet meaning people do their work and only occasionally have to use their voices the loud way. There are still winter alarms and summer misunderstandings, but the border markets provide a cushion. Silk moves, horses move, salt moves, letters move, and with them, a gentler form of rumour moves, the kind that tells you which guard brought his dog, and therefore which gate is in a good mood. People often say empires rest on swords. It would be truer here to say they rest on lists. At a banquet in Chang'an, a poet tries to describe the steppe and produces, after 3 cups and an argument with a lute, several perfectly respectable metaphors and one that will not leave him alone. A library of wind. He writes it down and is immediately embarrassed. At a fire north of the wall, a singer tries to describe the city and comes up with a line that makes the tent laugh until the kettle sloshes. A market that sits still. Both fall asleep, pleased with themselves, and wake slightly sore from their own cleverness, which is the correct price for such phrases. Travelling north with an envoy now, you notice another small truth. The Hekin gifts have developed a patina of usefulness. A silk robe no longer lives folded except for ceremony. It is worn on days when decisions arrive, because silk reminds hands to move carefully. A bronze mirror is consulted less for vanity than for checking whether the winter has left a mark on a man that needs salve. A set of copper bowls circulates through tents like a song, and when at last a bowl is dented, a child discovers it makes a better sound, and begins a fashion that will annoy purists for a generation. Trade makes art by accident. What of Modu, you ask, in this part of the story? He is not a ghost yet. He is a rumour that still remembers to eat on time. Men speak his name with the neatness they reserve for tasks that make money. He is invoked at councils as a unit of measure. Is this plan in the spirit of Modu? Someone shrugs and says, if we arrive when we mean to, we can claim it is. The habit he built, assemble widely, act precisely, has become vernacular. You can hear it in the way a camp decides to move at the second watch instead of the third. and in the way a market shifts its stalls to catch a wind and calls that good urban planning. The Hahn court, having learned Baideng's lesson, tries not to forget it. But time is persuasive. Summer does its lazy magic, and there is always a cousin of ambition who thinks the weather owes him a favour. Emperor Wu will one day climb into the story with new arithmetic. He will count corridors and depots and make neat, hungry lines. That is a later winter's work. For now, the agreement holds because it pays. Silk is a kind of treaty. So are foals. So are the jokes men tell when they agree not to draw maps any closer. If you're wondering whether love lives in Hequin, if any of the marriages warmed into something more than a line in a ledger, the answer, as usual, is yes, and not always. There are couples who turn policy into soup, who make a stew out of a cultural difference and find it good. There are others who perform their parts like professionals, and then sit by themselves and look at a sky that refuses to tell them whether they did well. The tents make room for both truths. The city scrolls do not, but that's because scrolls prefer decisions to weather. On a certain morning, a border market's drummer beats a slow pattern to signal opening, and the sound goes out like a thoughtful bird. The pass answers with echoes that make the day feel official. A horse shakes its mane so vigorously that a child claps as if the horse has delivered a speech. The kettle says yes in its native language. Somewhere a scribe loses a page and invents a better one because the wind insisted. A guard hums a tune he swears he does not know. The world, for the length of a paragraph, pretends to be simple. It won't last, not in one permanent piece. Nothing does. A drought will cut a sentence in half. A harvest will add an unnecessary exclamation point. But the grammar learned at Baideng will stay, tucked into people's pockets like a good knife. When trouble comes, someone will suggest a gift. When pride stiffens, someone will pour a drink. When a gate insists, someone will propose a market instead of a fight, and the gate, being a gate, will be flattered into opening. That is not romance. That is civilization. Night again. The felt breathes with you. That is its craft. The horses sleep like creatures who understand that tomorrow is polite and will arrive on time. In the dark, you hear a voice practice a message it will carry at first light, and the words are ordinary. Numbers and months and who will be where and whether the ox carts should be sent ahead with the repaired bowls. You hear also the low laugh that happens when someone remembers the Emperor's face at a particularly cold council, and says he looked exactly like a man who had never wanted to be a character in a winter story. You hear the step reply with its own humour, a gust that flips the tent flap and then, mischievously, holds it still. Baideng taught both sides how to be tired together without quitting. Hequin taught them what to do with that tiredness. Market days, shared boredom, durable jokes, warm bowls, lists. Tomorrow will present itself with that soothing arrogance only winter mornings can muster. The kettle will hum, the wall will suggest, the step will propose an alternate route, the riders will nod, the clerks will frown at a comma and leave it as is. Somewhere in all this a new rumour will be born, a small one about a little gift that saved a large amount of trouble, and it will travel like a good arrow, not too fast, exactly far enough. You lie down. The broth has gone to do its gentle work. The felt holds back the cold with the grace of an old friend who knows when to interrupt. The hoofbeats move to the edge of hearing, a lullaby that doesn't need to be named. And as sleep approaches like a messenger with excellent manners, you remember how this part began. Winter with opinions, a ring that tightened like a thoughtful belt, a gift sent into the colder air and returned as warmth. You remember the wall being reasonable and the riders being reasonable by other means. You remember that empires are only as clever as their cooks and as durable as their jokes. You remember Baideng, not as a place to tremble, but as a lesson in the art of pointing at the kettle and agreeing that it should keep humming. You lie down. The broth has gone to do its gentle work. The felt holds back the cold with the grace of an old friend who knows when to interrupt. The hoofbeats move to the edge of hearing, a lullaby that doesn't need to be named. And as sleep approaches like a messenger with excellent manners, you remember how this part began. Winter with opinions, a ring that tightened like a thoughtful belt, a gift sent into the colder air and returned as warmth. You remember the wall being reasonable and the riders being reasonable by other means. You remember that empires are only as clever as their cooks and as durable as their jokes. You remember Baideng, not as a place to tremble, but as a lesson in the art of pointing at the kettle and agreeing that it should keep humming. Tomorrow will ask for other arts. It will ask for maps with hungrier lines and horses with longer lungs. It will print the names Wei Qing and Horshu Bing on the snow in hard letters. It will raise the word hexy like a banner for corridors that have no patience with amateur logisticians. But tonight, Baideng has the last word. A quiet Heckian yes that carries, and a felt flap that agrees, and a winter that approves of men who learn to negotiate with the weather before trying to negotiate with each other. Sleep then. The stars are lanes. The kettle is an oracle. The hoofbeats are time, and time, for once, is kind. The border market wakes as if someone pinched the dawn. A drummer with cold fingers taps a pattern on the rim of a basin. Opening song, nothing fancy. The felt tents have drifted closer to the pass overnight, like sheep finding each other in fog, and the Walls Gate yawns the way gates do when they're trying not to look surprised. Steam lifts from kettles in elegant coils, braiding with the breath of horses. The air tastes of wood smoke, boiled grain, and the bright metal tang of new coins. Silk unrolls with a hush, felt answers with a friendly rasp. Nobody calls this a treaty. They call it Market Day, and Market Day is the quietest kind of peace. The first customers are professionals. A woman from the Riders who buys dye the colour of creek shadow. A clerk from the city who claims to be just looking and proceeds to weigh every bone needle on offer with the concentration of a judge at a poetry contest. Two boys, one in wool boots, one in lacquered shoes, compare how quickly they can count horses passing the gate. The boots win, but only because the shoes keep stopping to admire the patterns on a bridle. A guard tries a saddle and sits like a man who has just discovered he is taller than he thought. He grins. The saddle, flattered, doesn't squeak. Follow a parcel north and you will find a felt home that has perfected the art of being both portable and trustworthy. Outside, tether ropes sketch geometry on the ground. Inside, order lives in small things. A chest with bronze buckles, a plaited leather strap for suspending a kettle at exactly the height that makes tea sensible. A pegs and knot system so elegant that the tent seems to assemble itself out of good manners. On a wall peg hangs a composite bow, its back bright with polished horn, its belly the colour of old honey. It was raised from contradiction, wood, horn and sinew, not to start arguments, but to end them efficiently. The bow remembers storms and sings about them when you pull it to half-draw. You answer with oil and patience. This is the promise of Hikin made practical. Silk goes north, horses go south, grain follows the hand that pays, and good jokes cross the line with no tariff at all. Gifts have become goods. Goods have turned into habits. You can hear the habit in the market's rhythm. The crack of a scales balance bar, the soft percussion of folded cloth, the ritual cough men use to signal the last price. The steppe and the city have decided, temporarily but sincerely, to share their boredom. Paperwork thickens like stew. Rails of tents appear where last winter there were only wind and speculation. A bowl of broth learns the names of 3 languages and answers kindly to each. Craft is a religion here, but one without sermons, only demonstrations. A bowyer smears hide glue with the careful disinterest of a doctor changing a bandage. A fletcher turns shafts until the grain is true, and the arrow can listen better to the wind. A leather worker threads gut through lamellae that will flex like speech rather than crack like pride. The word lamella is not used, but the idea is lived. Little plates laced together so that when you move, the world forgives you a little. There is metal, yes, iron bits for horses, iron knives for work, but not yet the heavy stirrup that will change everything later. For now, control lives in calf and knee, in practice and partnership. When you're told to trust your seat, the advice is literal. Across the market, a blacksmith's fire makes a fist of light in the morning. He lifts an iron ring with tongs and tests it against a peg for a fit that is more philosophy than measurement. Sparks jump and die as if performing a small comedy for the benefit of a waiting boy. The boy is bored in the noble way of apprentices, yearning for drama doomed to excellence. The smith does not hurry, because hurrying is how iron makes a fool of you. He dips the ring, and steam writes a letter the wind immediately steals. Somewhere, a clerk in Chang'an will write that the Xiongnu are fond of iron. The clerk is right, and also too tidy. What the riders love is durability. Iron is a loyalty that doesn't need flattering. Trade is not only a matter of objects, it is an exchange of speeds. The city moves in lists, tax rolls, warehouse tallies, calendars that know what day it is without going outside. The steppe moves in patterns, seasonal loops, grazing arcs, messenger lines that arc like migrating birds. When these two speeds meet and decide not to ruin each other's day, roads happen. Not roads with paving and milestones, roads with hoofprints and memory. If you ask how to get from this market to the next, people will draw a map on their palms, using creases for rivers and lifelines for passes. You will arrive if you remember to ask the wind's permission. Rumour is honest work here. It carries news of grass and goods with the same careful tone. Rumour says the Zhang Qian sent south and west by the hand to look for allies has found cities where horses drink from marble basins and pomegranates tell fortunes. Rumour says the Yuezhi, pressed from their old lands, have set up shop in Bactria where coins carry faces that stare like uncles at a wedding they didn't plan. Rumour exaggerates, as rumour must, but the exaggerations are directional. They point traders like compass needles. Within a few years, men who once traded only felt and meat will carry glass beads and ideas about grapes. This is how a road is born without anyone laying a single brick. On certain afternoons, a caravan pulls up, camels complaining with the eloquence of experts, horses stretching like men after good soup. The bales are wrapped in cloth stamped with the insignias of places the riders have not seen. The bales smell of basements and long patience. A trader cuts one open, revealing bolts of silk dense enough to make frost feel insecure. Another bale holds skeins of wool dyed not with creek shadow, but with something like sunset. A third, when cut, releases the smell of dried fruit, and everyone's eyes widen, as if a god had entered wearing a raisin's clothing. These are not luxuries so much as biographies, things that tell you where they've been without having to brag. For men who live in motion, such objects are perfect. They carry a narrative you can fold. Within the tents, the work of living remains eloquently ordinary. You wake to the sound of kettle and hoof, which is also the name of an old song people sing when they have made their point and intend now to enjoy themselves. Breakfast is practical, broth that re-educates the hands, meat if there is some, dairy in various moods. Fermented mare's milk makes an appearance. It is drunk with the gravity of medicine and the optimism of a toast. Someone says it cures everything, which is the correct number of claims for a beverage. Millet may be cooked, its scent reminding people of settled neighbours and old experiments. Children are bribed to be good with dried curds that both strengthen and challenge their courage. A pot of grains sits like a simple throne. All true empires sit on such thrones. Work divides along lines you could predict and others you could not. Women keep tents that look the way a map looks when you finally understand it. Obvious. They make felt not as a task, but as a persuasion. Warmth coaxed into obedience from the stubborn wool of animals who would prefer to keep it. They sew with bone needles that gleam like tiny moons. They host with a hospitality precise enough to be mistaken for ceremony. A stranger is offered the good bowl, not because it's a law, but because life is a sequence of moments to be embarrassed by later if you don't try to be kind. Men tend herds and also feelings, the latter less adroitly. They ride, repair, retrieve. They inspect lines on a horse's flank and pronounce diagnoses that sound like poetry, but turn out to be practical. Children learn by touching everything they are not supposed to touch, and by being gently corrected by someone who remembers being exactly like that, a week ago or 20 years. A boy is taught never to walk in front of a drawn bow, even if the owner swears his mind is elsewhere. A girl is taught the knots that release if you pull the honest tail. Both are taught to read prints, hoof, paw, foot, like a book that has gone out of fashion among people who prefer their stories bound. They race each other to the stream and practice the fine art of arguing without insulting the future. The tent, knowing how to keep peace, breathes evenly. Belief here is not an official with a hat. It is a climate. The sky is regarded not as property, but as elder. Offerings occur, milk flicked upwards so a white arc briefly sketches a wish. Meat set aside with the politeness shown to someone more important than you. There are rites at edges, season changes, child namings, marriages, departures, when a drum speaks in a dialect of heartbeats, and a singer goes so high, the horse looks around as if someone had forgotten to tie the wind. Call it shamanic if you like labels. Call it practical if you dislike being wrong. The purpose is clear, to talk with what outlasts us. The horse is a partner in these conversations. People stroke a foal's forehead and call it by a name that means both light and idea. The animal accepts without committing to philosophy. At night the sky's an operating manual. The constellations here are not kings with spears but geographies. The river that tells you where to camp, the archer that reminds you about work, the mare-foal pair that says wait 2 weeks for this grass. A woman draws a star line with her finger on a child's palm and says, if that one is there, then we should look to the low ridge by morning. The child nods as if she understands now. She will. The sky's generous with adults who practiced as children. It rewards the long apprenticeship of looking up. If you ask where these people store their wealth, they will show you a chest with a lock you can outsmart if you work at it. Because here, locks are not about keeping out wickedness. They are about giving people time to decide not to be wicked. Inside are things that make sense. A robe reserved for certain days, a coil of rope shaped by use into a sentence that says more than grammar can. A bronze mirror that tells the truth with a little flattery. A strip of embroidered cloth with tiny mountains in it. Mountains the family has never seen but may someday. Beside the chest sits a small bag that holds the bone toggles nobody intends to lose again, and will without fail. A joke in the tent says the gods invented bone toggles to remind people they are human. Far to the north and west, the earth keeps secrets in mounds. Centuries from now, people will open Noinula and find textiles that whisper about hands in other countries. The colours argue gently with the light, refusing to be as old as they are. There are treasures, lacquer, wood, fabrics, that suggest journeys longer than stories like to admit. Here and at places like Golmod by the Orkhon and along the Aegean Gol, the graves speak in the voice archaeology prefers, slow, cautious, euphonious with caveats. The voice says, leaders were honoured, trade was real, art paid attention. The living do not need excavation to know this. They see it daily in the way a visiting envoy's belt loop has a combined knot they only learned about last year. Between market and mound lies the courier road. It's not a single line. It's a handful of trusted possibilities. Young riders carry messages folded as tightly as virtue and wrapped in felt to keep them safe from weather and the untidiness of human attention. They ride across a country that can turn from ally to lecturer in an hour, and they do not complain because complaining would slow the horse, and the horse does not deserve that. Relay stations are informal, friendly tents, known wells, a family that freckles the land at honest intervals. A boy in one camp knows that on the 4th day of a run, the courier will be exactly hungry enough to accept a small apple. Apple Day is his favourite day. He has never once eaten the apple himself, that's a kind of religion too. Signal fires still speak from towers farther south, beacons that practice punctuation. A thin smoke for rumour, a fatter one for credible, fire for regret. In the steppe, signals take other forms. 3 riders in a shallow V, a blanket hung a certain way, a song played in a key that says west, to ears that were taught the phrase before they were taught their names. You learn to be the kind of person who looks for meaning before noise. If you've ever watched weather approach with more interest than dread, you already understand this language. The border market thickens by noon, and with it thickens a style of diplomacy that requires no speeches. A woman from the steppe plays host to a bureaucrat from the wall. With such good humour he forgets to be official until it's too late, and he's already promised that a certain gate will open early next month. An old man from the city shows a group of teenagers how to fold paper into a bird. They show him how to fold a tent flap so it stops complaining in a northerly. Everyone claps at the right time. The tent is pleased with itself. The gate will be pleased later, sometime after the second bowl of broth. Because wise people know there's always a second bowl, the storytellers begin. One tells of a tapestry that remembered mountains it had travelled through and wrinkled itself into their shapes when hung in a flat tent. Another tells of a princess in a city who stepped into a painting and changed a general's mind, and how her shadow was useful even where her face could not be. Some say Wang Zhaojun, others say a different name. The story's a tool used by many hands. A third tells of a caravan master who could smell a storm 2 valleys away, and timed his jokes like doorways, so you always ended up inside when it mattered. None of these are provable. All are agreed upon. Truth here is a draft animal, strong, willing, happiest when harnessed to something practical. Craft returns to the scene with the afternoon light. A weaver counts under her breath as she throws the shuttle, patterns that look like grammar. She's making a band that will become a belt that will become a story other people see before they hear it. Her neighbour works felt by rolling it with her forearms, a steady music of effort. As she rolls, she talks to a child about colour, the colours that last and the ones that flirt and leave. She explains why creek shadow dye is loyal and sunset dye is temperamental. The child laughs, because calling dye temperamental is exactly right. The child will remember this when she chooses thread for a dress that will persuade someone to agree to something important without realising they were persuaded. From 1,000 small efficiencies, wealth appears. Not a treasure you can raid. Wealth that can get up in the morning and make more of itself. A new foal in spring. A set of bowls that endure to see grandchildren. A trade friendship that survives a sharp word because both parties have learned the disciplined art of swallowing pride with hot tea. Lists become possible. Lists mean planning. Planning means you can afford to be generous, and generosity is a seed that finds ground wherever it is dropped. Good leaders sow it out of habit, moderately, daily, like salt. In all this, the horse keeps its appointments, its coat changes with the season, its patience changes with your posture. It is a sacred partner not because anyone says so, but because everyone acts like it. A boy cleans a hoof and murmurs, whether to the horse or to himself no one can tell, that life is easier when you do the small things thoroughly, and the big things only when necessary. The horse flicks an ear in assent. A girl learns the trick of checking a cinch without making a show of it. She will carry that trick into other settings and never be sorry. At dusk, the market thins with the dignity of a ceremony concluding. Scales are put away, bolts are re-rolled, spoons are counted with the emotional honesty spoons require. Agreements are tied with cord, some are tied with jokes, which are stronger. A guard lifts the bar on the gate with the flourish of a man who will someday tell his grandchildren how he once opened history. He will be right and sound ridiculous in the correct proportion. Night moves in on soft feet. In the tents, stories happen at the pace of kettles. An old woman shows a line of bone toggles and tells where each was lost and found, and around her laugh the people who lost and found them. An old man unties a rope and reties it in a way that will save a future afternoon. A singer closes her eyes and makes a note so clean the hairs on the horse outside stand up to hear it better. The hooves beyond the felt draw a slow circle in the frost, as if measuring out a shawl for the camp's shoulders. Listen, and you can hear the larger trades being made. The steppe has traded a little risk for a lot of predictability. The city has traded a little pride for a lot of horizon. Between them, like a road you can fold, stands a confidence that tomorrow will be usefully like today. It will not last forever, nothing does. Storms will come with their invoices. New emperors will bring new mathematics. Ambitious men will pronounce corridors the way poets pronounce rivers. But tonight, the account balances. Walk once more through the sleeping market and you will see an inventory of a civilization that moves. Saddles propped like faithful dogs, bow cases resting like punctuation marks at the ends of long sentences, chests that contain, along with their tangible things, people's resolve to keep being themselves without being impossible. South, in a lamplit room, a scribe drafts a note about establishing a guard post farther west along the Hexy corridor. He dips his brush and considers whether the ink should be darker. North, by a brazier, a woman adds one more line to a woven band. The pattern subtle as consent. Both are working on the same story from different chapters. In the breaths between embers, belief returns. Not grand, just present. Someone steps outside and flicks a drop of milk to the sky and thanks it for not falling. Today, here. Someone touches a horse's warm neck and then their own cold cheek to borrow an opinion. Someone ties the tent's last knot as if shaking hands with weather. It's not superstition. It's diplomacy with the large things. You practice courtesy on gods the way you practice it on neighbours, because only fools turn friendship into a surprise. Tomorrow more caravans will grumble into shape, more parcels will travel tucked into felt and intention, more words will cross borders disguised as jokes, more lists will be made, more children will be impressed by spoons, and not far ahead in our road, a different rhythm will arrive. Audible already if you tilt your head. Campaigns counted by Wei Qing and Ho Kubing, a corridor taken as if it were a string in a harp, a confederation asked to split like light through a crack. But the strength of what comes will still rest on what we've seen today. The practiced ease, the portable competence, the ability to turn a market into a treaty and a treaty into lunch. Sleep comes like a messenger with warm hands. The tent collects your breath and gives it back as gentled air. The kettle hums, as it has in every part of this story. The felt settles. The hoofbeats graze the edge of hearing, promising another morning with the same old miracles. The gate opening, the drum tapping, the silk unrolling, the felt answering. You lie back and let the road through wind continue without needing you to watch it. It knows the way. It has been learning all along. Night folds itself neatly and tucks under the rim of the plain. A beacon fire to the south clears its throat into the dark. One cough of smoke, then two, as if practicing punctuation. Inside the felt walls, the kettle hums with the unshowy pride of a tool that knows it is indispensable. Someone oils a bow. Someone counts arrows by touch. A blanket is shaken, and frost powders the air like flour. The tent breathes with you. Beyond the flap, the wall is a long, polite suggestion. Beyond the wall, a city stacks its mornings in tidy piles. Between them moves a habit that has learned your name. You can hear it arriving on hooves. The habit carries handwriting now. In Chang'an, where lacquer dries like a good decision, men bend over bamboo slips and draft a new arithmetic. The emperor on the throne, Han Wudi, is a man who respects lists. He prefers corridors to rumours, depots to surprises, and generals who can make snow admit it is merely water with ambitions. He inherits the Hikin rhythm that Baideng taught, and keeps its beat with one hand, while with the other he sketches lines where he'd like pressure to happen. A slip reads Hexi, the waste of the world where river and desert compromise. Wudi taps it with a brush as if waking a cat. Here, he says. The room agrees in the soft way rooms agree when they fear they will be made to carry boxes. The names that leave that room travel on winter air. Wei Qing and Ho Shubing, nephew and youth, caution and swiftness, both with a talent for choosing companions who can count hay. Their orders are not to perform heroics. Their orders are to alter supply. The new arithmetic says, cut the cords that tie step to certainty. Take the hexy corridor, those string of pearls oases that let caravans hum instead of wheeze. If you hold the waist, the robe hangs differently. The wind learns manners near the seam. Out on the plain, the Xiongnu feel the numbers before they hear them. A market gate opens later than usual. A friendly well yields more questions than water. A caravan arrives short of optimism and speaks vaguely about a patrol that neither demanded nor smiled. Rumour does its respectful work. It mentions a winter camp one valley closer to the passes than last year. It mentions horse bells heard at odd hours, and the way an enemy can be courteous without being kind. Within a week, steppe tents tilt a little, as if listening. Wei Qing's style is to be in several correct places at modestly surprising times. His horses learn to love roads made of wind and intention. He strikes where a ledger would wince, at granaries, at relay stockpiles, at that practical miracle called rope. He is not cruel, which tempts enemies into underestimating him. He believes in the philosophy of closures. Close a pass, close a season, close the option. A rival thought he had, and then let him ride around with the knowledge like a rock in his boot. He respects winter the way you respect a senior clerk, out loud, early, and with spare socks. Horcubing's style is a bright knife. He moves quickly enough to make calendars blush. He wears youth like a well-fitted saddle, balanced, capable of long days, unwilling to argue with terrain. Where Weiqing draws polygons, Huo draws darts. He cuts into the steppe like a sentence that has no time for subordinate clauses. He returns with proof that the road west can be persuaded to run under hand feet, and with the kind of trophies that speak to cities, banners, belts, a few names scribes can spell. Together they tell Hexi that its future will be administered from the south. Outposts appear like commas, places to pause a thought and then continue it. Juquan, Zhangye, city names that sound like an accountant's favourite nephews, are carved into the map and given jobs. Caravans adjust. Men who thought their grandchildren would be clouds learn they might be invoices. The corridor tightens. The steppes pocketbook loosens. The Xiongnu feel the change like a familiar road paved with uncertainty. In a long tent warmed by 2 braziers and 3 arguments, the Chanyu consults. A cup of Ma's milk is set down with the decision already in it. Pull camps inward. Winter where wind breaks kindly. Stop pretending that a foe who brings ledgers to a fight is unserious. The leaders of the left and right wings speak in weather. If we are snow, do not ask us to be rain. If we are windbreak, do not ask us to be kite. Men who have always known where lambs will be in the 3rd month begin to misremember, which is the first sign of an arithmetic imposed from outside. Pressure does not shatter first, it splits. This is the shape of the next chapter, a confederation dividing into the southern and northern Xiongnu, not with a chisel, but with the persuasive power of winter plus markets. Southward, a leader named Huhanye reads the room and the sky with equal care. He says it may be time to place the tent where the grain is counted, within the hand's embrace, with hostages given and favours requested in the careful sequence that lets pride retreat without losing its saddle. Northward, his rival Jiji sharpens maps and looks west with a stare that would make a door open if he believed in doors. He imagines a fortress you can bring to the steppe, a square of will at the edge of desert. Huhanye rides to the border like a man practicing the art of arriving. He brings gifts and the sort of letter that lets another man be generous. He offers a son as hostage and receives in return not only silk and grain, but a way to measure years that includes tax remissions and market vouchers. He's not selling the steppe, he's paying its bills with new coin. He takes a seat near the ordos and learns the bureaucracy like a song, first the chorus, then the verses. His people winter softer, markets open more promptly, the kettle gets heavier in a comfortable way. He cultivates a talent for being underestimated while eating well. Gigi does not cultivate such talents, he cultivates walls. He rides beyond the familiar palimpsest of tracks, to a west most of his rivals think is merely a rumour, and begins to build a fortress, near what later maps will name the Talas or the region of Taras. He arranges timbers into the act of insisting. This is a steppe heresy that pleases him, a stubborn square against a fluent horizon. It will anchor compensations and command a market and say to the world that mobility can pretend to be stone if it chooses. He populates it with men who treat a trowel as a spear that got a job. In Chang'an, the rumour of this square disturbs men who thought the steppe's virtue was being pleasantly hard to pin. A general named Gan Yanshu gets his orders. A deputy named Chen Tang sharpens them. The story that later travels, how Chen, impatient with the pace of permission, declared that armies can be set in motion without waiting for imperial rescripts, and then set one in motion, is told in kitchens with a cluck of scandal and a glint of admiration. The truth is calmer. Men read the wind, wrote a letter to match it, and arrived at a fortress in 36 BCE with the right number of ladders and a supply train that did not apologise. The siege is work, not theatre. The fortress does what fortresses do, refuse politely, then personally. The attackers do what professionals do, test, revise, repeat. Inside the walls, Gigi walks the parapet with a posture that promises destiny. Outside, an archer rubs his fingers together to wake them between shots, and thinks only of hitting what he aims at. A day ends without a trumpet. Then another. Grain keeps its opinions to itself. Wood remembers the hands that cut it. On a morning that does not look different from other mornings, the square runs out of ways to pretend it is inevitable. The fall, later made dramatic in retellings, is simple here. Doors that are no longer doors, a gate that looks surprised to find itself horizontal, Chen Tang writing a line that will travel farther than he does. They take heads? You will not hear it here. Such news satisfies the wrong appetite at bedtime. What matters is the gesture that follows, the message letters sent home, the tidying of the ledger, the way the siege's end changes how the West thinks about lines. The fortress collapses back into the steppe like a boast folded into a coat pocket. Gigi becomes a warning that even the horizon prefers flexible people. And in the tents north and east, the news is served with tea and careful faces. A man who's been considering his daughter's marriage looks down and adjusts his plan by a quiet inch. Uhanya's path thickens into a road. Client status with the Han that brings stipends and a short list of duties. Guard a stretch of border. Show up for parades in the mind. Keep your more excitable cousins entertained with regulated markets. His people live within arm's length of the wall and discover the daily comedy of paperwork. A Chanyu's envoy is given a tile that says who he is. A clerk admires it, copies it, misfiles the copy, and fixes his error by inventing a better system. The southern Xiongnu's tents grow familiar with the smells of lacquer and the gossip of stable hands who admire their horses without pretending to own them. It is not heaven or humiliation. It is an arrangement. One that feeds children and gives old men projects in winter. North, the story frays and folds into another people's story. Jianbei riders, quick, observant, fond of the kind of advantage that looks like luck to those who weren't paying attention, begin to write their names across territories the northern Xiongnu used to consider obvious. Skirmishes accumulate into advisories. Advisories accumulate into migrations. Migrations accumulate into arguments about where the world keeps its centre. Some of the northern Xiongnu drift toward the Altai, some farther, the line becoming dotted in the historian's hand where the riders themselves stopped insisting on being a line. From time to time, new names wake up with old habits in their saddlebags. The steppe has always recycled competence. A generation, and then two, pass. Markets open on schedule enough to teach children the days of the week without needing the moon to help. The Ordos fills with that special tone of voice people use when they say we, about two places at once. City and tent learn each other's shortcuts. The quickest way to get a message through an office. The quickest way to tie a flap so a northerly can't be clever. A southern Xiongnu leader signs a paper, and then, as if remembering the older language, strings his bow and looks to feel if the sinew approves. There are years when raids vanish into ledgers, and years when ledgers turn back into the old sport for a night, and then agree to be numbers again. East of the Ordos, down in halls with trained echoes, the Eastern Han continue to think about the North the way gardeners think about rabbits. Fondly, abstractly, and with a practical interest in fences. A general named Duxian will one day ride deep, 89 CE, if you like your winters labelled, and carve words into rock in a place of cold grammar called the Yanren Mountains. That inscription will brag politely on behalf of men whose horses remembered to be brave and whose quartermasters remembered to count. It will say the northern Xiongnu were chastened. A word scrolls a door when they have the upper hand. Whether broken or merely redirected, the result is the same in kitchens. New routes for rumour, different faces at market, an old tune sung in a new key. What lasts? The obvious things do not. Land changes its mind about who represents it. A pass takes a new name because the scribe at the checkpoint married a woman with a cousin who made a good joke. The Hexi corridor remains, but under different management styles. The southern Xiongnu endure as neighbours who became colleagues, and occasionally tried on rebellion, because human beings are compelled by variety. The northern Xiongnu are a wind that you can still feel when a camel snorts in a city you have never seen. The Xianbei will have their years, and then make room for other hooves. A scholar asked the hot question, did these Xiongnu become the Huns whose names echo in European valleys late at night when storytellers are feeling seasonal? The steppe answers with its usual courtesy. Perhaps. Likely in pieces. Surely an echo's names travel like lentils, by handfuls mixed with other things, nourishing even when the label is peeled off. Language, grave goods, riding style, titles. Threads tie east to west across lifetimes. A potter in a far place shapes a rim the way a grandmother on the Orkney shaped it, because hands learn faster than maps. A boy west of the Altai learns to rise in the stirrup, not yet a stirrup, not yet, by pressing calf and knee, and his teacher's teacher learned the trick under a felt roof that smelled like the inside of a story we already told. Cautious historians say, continuity of pattern. Grandmothers say, of course. Both are being sensible for their audiences. What certainly travels is the method. An empire carried, not parked. A left-wing and right-wing leadership that lets power be a bird instead of a rock. The portable state that wakes, folds, rides, and unfolds in time to receive envoys with warm bowls and cooler questions. The silk for horses trade will simplify itself into a lesson. Exchange makes neighbours tolerable. The bow will keep singing, the horse will keep forgiving, winter will keep winning arguments nobody should try to win. The wall will keep being a suggestion that hardened in some places and softened in others, and between them, the market will keep discovering that shared boredom is the day-to-day scaffolding of peace. Now, tilt back into the tent where we began. The night returns with professional confidence. In the south, a clerk snores into a brush rest. In the north, a dog chases a concept and forgets it mid-dream. The kettle lifts a shoulder of steam. Someone strings a bow and then, because habit is love, unstrings it for the night. A leatherworker lays down a strip of lamelle as carefully as a monk lays down a text. A child hides a bone toggle in a shoe to test whether anyone notices. Someone does. They laugh gently, because one should encourage mischief that ends in inventory. The wall in moonlight is less a scar than a spine. It holds up, yes, but also offers to bend. Watchtowers blink like owls. The gate remembers today's successful market and tells itself it had a hand in history. It did, in the small way that is the only way. A guard wraps his scarf twice, once for cold, once for conversation, and tells his partner that the step music isn't bad once you stop expecting a chorus. His partner says the city's music isn't bad either, if you listen for the kettles. Both men are tired and feel virtuous about it. They are participants in a piece useful enough to withstand poems. Ride west with me one last time into a rumour where the road is mostly what people say about it. Camels step like men reciting oaths. Horses step like men correcting them. A trader points his chin at a star and says this will take us to a well with bitter water that is good for our foolishness. His son repeats the phrase because the taste of the words is part of the map. They pass a mound not yet opened and greet it as if it were a neighbour who went inside too early and will come out again when the tea is hotter. They tell a joke about corridors that makes the camels bray in solidarity. Night agrees. In a small camp off that road, a woman threads a pattern into a band, a red that behaves, a blue that likes drama. She murmurs the counts 2, 3, 2, 4, 2. The band will hold up a bundle. It will also hold up a memory of a market drummer who tapped a similar rhythm on a basin to call people to buy and sell instead of boast and bleed. She ties off the end and tests the strength with both hands. Good, she says. She has described governance. Let us visit, briefly, the rooms with maps and verses. In Chang'an, the emperor who loved lines is replaced by men who love other shapes. In the tents, a Chanyu who loved proximity is replaced by cousins who love angles. Scribal hands tire and are replaced. Horse legs tire and are replaced. Continuity is not a person. It is a practice. It is a kettle still on the fire, and someone remembering to check the rope even when the rope has never once misbehaved. It is the habit of counting lambs and letters in the same afternoon. It is knowing which gate opens more cheerfully if you address the guard by the nickname he pretends to be embarrassed by. There are days when the Hessian rhythm misses a beat and hands reach for old tools. A herd goes missing and shows up in poetry. A clerk misreads a stamp and a fight fails to happen out of sheer good fortune. A rumour says the Xianbei will visit tomorrow. A rumour says they already have, you just didn't notice. A rumour says a cousin's cousin rode until the world narrowed into a river with foreign fish, and returned with a word for saffron that tastes good in soup. Rumours are not wrong. They are a chorus that helps the melody walk. By the second bowl of evening broth, the elders get opinionated. They say, what we built was a way to remember each other even when we moved. We learned how to fold a promise and carry it to a new camp. We learned where to place a tent so a storm sits down and thinks better of itself. We learned that paperwork is just a saddle with different straps. We learned that a wall makes a fine neighbour if you invite it to market day and do not ask it to sing. We learned that an empire can keep its dignity on a wagon. Someone asks, soft, and the Huns far away. The elders shrug in the friendly stepway that says, it's complicated. They speak of echoes, the sound of a bow half drawn across languages, the hoofbeat cadence that convinces kitchens to adjust the stew, titles that are cousins to other titles even when the scribes disagree across deserts. They believe in cousins the way some men believe in comets. It is a reasonable faith. Sleep takes the camp by degrees. The fire slouches into embers. The kettle keeps humming because all good stories require it. The horse breaths ascend to that quiet where tomorrow is already being made. You lie down on woven things that remember hands. The felt holds your heat with professional pride. You think of Modu's quiet signal and how it learned to travel, of Baideng's winter that remembered diplomacy, of market days that domesticated rumour, of Hexie's practical poetry, of southern prudence and northern insistence, of a fortress that tried to make a square out of horizon and lost the argument politely, of Chambay lines that wrote themselves across tired ground, of inscriptions on mountains that outlast voices, of a road that kept unrolling because people wanted grapes and news in equal measure. If you step outside before sleep arrives fully, the sky's busy with lanes. The stars do that ancient managerial thing, reminding the world of its appointments. The wall gleams faintly like a line under a sentence you meant to memorize. A far beacon adds one dot of orange to the grammar. The horses arrange themselves into a half moon, which any poet will tell you is the correct shape for resting courage. Somewhere, someone flicks a drop of milk up and thanks the sky for tolerating humans today again. Somewhere else, a clerk closes a ledger, and not knowing why, smiles. You pull the flap shut. The felt answers with its usual modest excellence. The hoofbeats fade to the edge of hearing, which is the place where they work best. The kettle assures you that agreements can be kept at a simmer for years if you mind the fire and do not get ambitious about rolling boils. Tomorrow, new names will take old positions, new maps will adopt old lanes, new jokes will discover that markets are their second home. The Asian Huns, the Xiongnu, will continue beyond this page in archives and in bone, in textiles and in titles, and in the memory of roads that do not need stones to be real. Sleep now. The story is not ending, it is bedding down, which is the wiser verb out here. When you wake, the world will already be in motion, obligingly. You will tie one knot, the honest tale, count one bundle, arrows or cups, either matters, and step into a morning that has made room for your feet. And as you ride, slowly, because slowness is how the step tells you secrets, you will hear how the past keeps up, politely and persistently, felt against your shoulder, a kettle's breath at your back, and hoofbeats carrying time forward as if time were a guest worth taking all the way home. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time,